hope you guys have had a good day so far. Welcome to the Community Camp for Palestine. Thank you guys for coming. My name is Mizan. I'm a camp guardian and an activist and an events organizer as well. This is our event on the theme of Zionism is racism. And we have two established, accomplished speakers, activists, scholars, you name it, very much engaged in the movement that will talk more about this subject, and also the motion that the motion that will be voted on in the Green Party's autumn conference. So basically, just to give you brief understanding of the format, what will happen is each of the speakers will get about 10 minutes to talk on the subject itself. Then we will have a brief question and answers between myself and the speakers, and then I will open it up to the floor for more questions and answers, okay? And also, please, if you could just keep it to short comments or questions, not long manifestos. That'll be really great. Okay, so what we'll do is I'm just going to introduce the speakers, and then I'll give them each 10 minutes to speak on their aspect of the theme. So first up will be Hazem Jamjoum. He is a cultural historian, a scholar. I also see him as an activist, but also he's also a translator of many books as well. One of my favorite is the 1936-1939 Revolutions by Ghassan Kanafani. It was a foundational text for me, and this is something that I started off with in the Intifada book club that we run over here. So Hazem will be talking about the actual substance of the title, how Zionism is racism towards the Palestinian people. He will have 10 minutes to speak on that subject. And then after that, we have Lubna from Greenwich Palestine Alliance. And also she is the proposer and the writer of the actual Green Party Zionism is Racism motion, which will be voted on in the autumn conference. So before I say anything else, if you're a Green Party member, please vote for the motion in the autumn conference. She will have 10 minutes to talk about the motion itself, why she wrote it, and any kind of oppression against it. And then we will have a conversation amongst ourselves, and then I will open it up to the audience to ask questions and answers. So yeah, thank you. I would like to just say a brief thank you so much for the speakers for coming. It's really great to have you guys here. I know you guys have been here before, but it's the first time I'm meeting you guys. So thank you so much for coming. So Hazem, I'll give you 10 minutes to actually talk about how Zionism is racism towards the Palestinian people. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's really wonderful to see familiar faces, and maybe even more wonderful to see unfamiliar faces, and to see that this encampment is still going as strong as ever. You're really, you're keeping this movement alive and keeping this flame alive in this city, and in this, kind of hard to overstate how important that is, especially as so many people seem to have kind of almost like moved on and felt almost saturated with 3 years of ongoing genocide, and just sort of like willing themselves into moving on, even though the genocide in Gaza has not stopped in any way, shape or form. And in the last week, it's really escalating in the West Bank. I'm sure all of you are following some of these horrifying news about the settlers just kind of running amok in Til 3 days ago, but really it's the entirety of the West Bank. And the way that the Israeli state has responded since the massacre in Til has been to really just shut down the entire West Bank and bring all of life to a standstill with an entire population that's not just caged, but also really terrified. And are very worried about what's to come next. And knowing Israel and knowing Zionism, which is what we're talking about, there's every reason to believe things are going to get immensely more horrifying. So it's all the more important that we redouble our efforts to show up and make a lot of noise about Zionism and its effects on Palestine, on Lebanon, on the entire region, but also on politics abroad, also on politics here. And I hope we get to talk about some of that in the discussion afterwards, because this really is not just something happening somewhere else. This is really something that has proven to be happening on a global level, and especially in places like Britain and the United States. And this is really the story of Zionism. So this is not unconnected to what we're here to discuss. So this is, I think, 11 months to the day since I was here last, and we spoke specifically about the entire history of Zionism and how it emerged. So I'm not going to rehash all of that. They recorded it. Many of you were here that day, and I'm sure those conversations have been ongoing before and since. But if we're just going to kind of zoom in on the effects of Zionism on people and who are on the receiving end of Zionism. So I think we need to start actually with where Zionism starts, which is in Jewish communities in Europe. Because the first victims of Zionism are actually Jewish Europeans. In the sense that Zionism comes out and says, look, there's no way we're going to win a fight against European racism. And there is no more, there cannot be a Jewish presence in Europe, right? So Zionists basically kind of concede this to European anti-Semites and say, you know what, the anti-Semites are right. We cannot be both Jewish and European. If we're going to be Jewish, we're going to have to leave Europe. We have to go somewhere else. And the only way that we're going to have any kind of freedom is if we have our own nation state, right? And this is by definition what Zionism is, which is a response to European anti-Semitism in the form of a campaign to create an exclusively Jewish state, initially anywhere in the world. And really the list of proposed geographies on where this Jewish state would be established spans the globe, right? From Madagascar to Florida to Newfoundland, to, of course, most famously Argentina and Uganda, and of course Palestine, perhaps most famously of all. And so really, I mean, this is not a propaganda point. It's not a media talking point. It's something to really fundamentally understand, is that Zionism is a mass enabler of European anti-Semitism. If we think about European anti-Semites, even in their most egregious movements, it was never really about mass eradication of Jews as people. It was about mass eradication of Jewish presence in Europe. Right? The only, if you were Jewish in Nazi Germany in the 1930s, the only place where you could move and take your property with you was Palestine, because they had already, the Nazis and the Zionists had made an agreement that they would enable the transfer of assets to Palestine using the Anglo-Palestine Bank, actually, as a way of facilitating Zionist transfer of Jewish people to Palestine. If we think about the anti-Semites in the National Front in Britain, about anti-Semites in the Ku Klux Klan in the United States, it's not about, that the purpose is not killing. The purpose is, we don't want Jews here. Jews shall not replace us, is the slogan, right? So it's about, we don't care that you're Jewish, just go be Jewish somewhere else. And Zionism enables this by accepting that premise and saying, yes, if we want to be Jews in our fullness as Jews, we need to go do it somewhere else. So if we were to have this Venn diagram of European anti-Semitism and Zionism, they meet in this massive intersection, which is Jewish people need to leave places that are coded white, European, North American, and go somewhere else. The other thing is that by playing ball, by entering into these agreements with the Russian government as it was committing pogroms, with the Nazi party as it was after Kristallnacht, right? As it was very clear what Nazism was about. With today, if we think about who are the allies of the Zionist movement and the State of Israel, it's almost every exclusivist, supremacist movement in the world. From the Tommy Robinsons, to the Nigel Farages, to Modi's BJP, to the Azerbaijan regime. It's every racist, supremacist regime in the world have basically banded together and have actually been very explicit in the last 10 or 15 years about Israel as a model. Right? They've been talking very explicitly, very clearly. This isn't done behind closed doors. It's done in minuted meetings, and it's done in front of media cameras, where this is before 2023, right? This is since the 2005, 6, 7, and definitely gearing up in those kind of Brexit years, which is this notion that to speak explicitly about, we see Israel as a model of what we want to see in the United States, what we want to see in Britain. A normalization of supremacist legal regimes, where we actually get to say this country is for one kind of person, and everyone else is really not welcome. We need to be able to pass laws that will enable us to expel these others, which will enable us to institutionalize discrimination, and for that to be legal and okay in polities like Britain, across Europe, across North America. And of course, whiteness and white supremacy is something that ties these other movements together. But now, in the last kind of, at least since the BJP won and took power in India, we're also seeing this kind of spill over into the non-white world, for lack of another phrase, right? We're seeing India and Azerbaijan, and we're seeing other movements, and I'm telling you now, and you can remember this, that in the next 10 years, we're going to see added normalization of campaigns and movements, and maybe they'll start winning elections, definitely in this country, already in the United States, of parties and movements that are calling for the normalization of supremacist thinking. The kind of thing that we thought in the post-World War II order we were going to be rid of by institutionalizing human rights, by saying it's illegal to have institutionalized racism and discrimination, by saying it's illegal to single out groups of people and for repression. And we thought this is fundamentally what the human rights regime is post-1945. This is all being rolled back, and it's all being rolled back with Israel as the spearhead of rolling it back. So again, I haven't really gotten into the meat of how Zionism is racism, but I want you to keep in mind as we have these conversations that aside from Zionism itself being a fundamentally racist and supremacist ideology, that Zionism is enabling racism on a global scale today, right? The Israeli state, with its military, its ideology, its influence in global media, its influence in politics and some of the major polities in the world, this country in particular, in the United States and Canada and Germany and France, is kind of blazing the trail for undoing the international order that says racism is a bad thing, at the very least, right? Much more than that. And it's all based on the fact that to understand why Israel becomes this model, we need to understand how Zionism is racist. Fundamentally, institutionally, deep in the pudding of Zionism is racism, right? And that's because it emerges as an idea, it emerges as a movement that's calling for an exclusive, for a state, for an exclusive type of people. Right? It's a movement that says there's something out there called the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, kind of transforms this. And remember, we're talking about the 1890s, early 1900s. Basically, this is the peak moment of what was called scientific racism and eugenics. So actually, it in more ways than one, transforms Judaism from a religious identity and in parts of Eastern Europe an ethnic identity. If we think about the Pale of Settlement, Judaism really is an ethnic identity. Transforms it into a kind of a racial identity. And if we look at the founding documents of these founding fathers of Zionism, they're all talking about the Jewish race. Like, this is very commonplace language. And they're very much influenced by the same philosophers like Fichte and Herder and others, who are the main philosophers underlying all supremacist thought in Europe, right? And particularly the Nazi movement. So what they're saying is, we want to transplant this population that we've now identified as a kind of a race, a Jewish race, to another place, and even regardless of whether it's Palestine or not, had they moved to Argentina or to Madagascar or to Florida or to Yorkshire, then, which would not have happened, then it would have still been that same fundamental logic of, if you are not part of the group that we're here creating an exclusive nation state for, this Jewish race that we've formulated, then you are not welcome. Even if you were here before we got here, even if your ancestors were here, even if your ancestors make up the soil that we're standing on, you would not be welcome, right? So by definition, we're talking about, at the very least, racism. Very clearly, we're talking about racial supremacy. And once this becomes a state in 1948, this immediately is transformed. Well, I mean, let's also talk about this period between the 1920s and 1940s, the British Mandate period, because this is a period where British racists and Zionists come together to work towards the establishment of the exclusive Jewish state, which becomes known as Israel, right? So there's a lot to talk about in this realm as well. But after 1948, we're immediately talking about a very obviously and blatantly racist and Jewish supremacist state. It's founded on the forced expulsion of 2/3 of the indigenous population, the Palestinian population. Immediately, its first laws and policies, military policies, are about excluding these people who were expelled by force by shooting on sight, right? The orders given to the Israeli military right away is that infiltrators, i.e. Palestinian refugees trying to come back home, are to be shot on sight. And all of the policies that are instituted against those Palestinians who managed to remain, who initially constituted 10 to 15% of the population, today constitute about 20% of Israel's citizens, were all based on, so for instance, if you were Palestinian who got Israeli citizenship in 1950, then you were not allowed to leave or enter your village without military permit. You were governed under military law, not under laws passed by the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. And all of those laws that were directed at you were geared towards expropriating any land left in the hands of Palestinians. Come to today, and in what's been happening in the last 30 or 40 years, the entirety of Israeli policy is geared towards maximum land under exclusive Zionist control, which is in law coded as Jewish control, with minimum Palestinians on that land. So everything we've seen in Gaza, but everything we've seen in the West Bank, everything we continue to see in 1948 occupied Palestine, is all policies geared around exclusion of this indigenous population and creating the maximum benefit for the population that legally is defined as Jewish. And I stress this, I said this last year when I was here. The reason I stress this issue of legal definition is it actually has nothing to do with your faith, has nothing to do with how you grew up, has nothing to do with your worldview or what you think your Jewishness means to you. Well, not me, because I'm Palestinian, but if one of you who is not Palestinian and not Jewish goes home tonight and finds out that your mother's mother was Jewish, you've been a national of the state of Israel all along. You just haven't known it. And all you need to do is go to the Jewish Agency office here in London, and you can be on the, just by virtue of meeting Israel's legal definition of Jewishness. So really, it's the question, is Zionism, is racism, is actually a ridiculous question. It's the fundamental example of racism. If we were to draw an ideal type, if we were kind of like, Plato, and wanted to draw what would the ideal type of in the world of ideas, what would a racist ideology look like, and to exaggerate it to the fullest, to the genocidal fullest, then we would describe Zionism. So there's actually kind of no way to debate this question. There's no way to look at Zionism other than as a racist ideology, at the very least. The question really is it fundamental to Zionism to be also genocidally racist? And I think the answer there is also yes. From the very beginning, way before 1948, it was very clear to the Zionist leadership. So you've all heard this phrase that's actually made by a Christian Zionist, Lord Salisbury, a land without a people for a people without a land. This was kind of a 19th century Zionist movement motto. Once the Zionists started to arrive in Palestine and realized it was not an empty land, from that moment, it was immediately clear to them that they were going to have to get rid of the indigenous population. Otherwise, how are you going to create an exclusive Jewish state? And so from the earliest 1900s, the Zionist movement has been enacting a genocide that simply speeds up and slows down. The Nakba was a genocidal moment. There's no question about that. You take up 2/3 of an entire indigenous population, either killed or forcibly expelled. What is that, if not genocide? And then to enact a series of policies that are on paper, it's not a hidden, you don't have to be too genius or kind of Sherlock Holmesy to figure out the racism. It's there in front of you in the laws, and especially in the way that the laws are enacted. That all of these policies are geared towards making Palestinians either forced to leave or miserable by cutting off their water and electricity, by eliminating any chance of them getting education, by eliminating any chance of them getting health care, by military violence, vigilante civilian violence. And the word civilian is very fraught in an Israeli context where everybody has gone through military training and is armed to the teeth, as we're seeing with the settlers in the West Bank today. And so all of these sets of both in theory, in thought, in writing, in policy, and in action, we are consistently every single day since the Zionist movement arrived in Palestine, seeing racism and Zionist supremacy in action. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. That was a very comprehensive speech about how Zionism is racism towards the Palestinian people, but also how it's been racist towards the Jewish people as well. Well, as you were talking, there was a couple of things that were going through my mind. Now, I can't exactly pinpoint which Israeli minister said this, but in the late 1980s, there was a government minister that was asked about what they refer to as the Arab citizens of Israel, or what I call Palestinian subjects of Israel, because basically they're it's all an apartheid state. And he was asked about the so-called rights, and it was interesting. He said they have some rights on the land, but no rights over the land. And I just thought that was a very, very interesting answer in regards to how the apartheid and the colonialism and the lack of control and domination actually works. And the other thing I was thinking about when you're talking is, when you're talking about Israel's diplomacy to these other states, I was thinking about Anthony Lowenstein's book, The Palestine Laboratory, because in the book, he actually talks about this quote-unquote diplomacy. And he actually says that Israel prefers these ethno-states, and he wants to create more of these ethno-states, because if the world was run by ethno-states, it would make it harder for the United Nations to actually deal with Israel as an ethno-state. So it's actually in its interest to support Modi and all these other ethno-states in around the world. So, yeah, those were some of the thoughts that were going through my mind as you were giving us that comprehensive speech. So thank you so much. All right, next up we have Lubna Speitan from Greenwich Palestine Alliance. She's also a part of Greens for Palestine as well, and she is the writer and proposer of the motion Zionism is Racism, which will be voted on in the autumn conference. So if anyone can go and vote for the motion, if you're a Green Party member, please go and vote for the motion. It's a very, very important motion. So I'm going to hand it over to Lubna now. She will be talking about the motion, why she wrote it, and if you want any kind of resistance to the motion as well. So yeah, thank you so much, Lubna.
Thank you. And if you're not in the Green Party, just join it anyway. Well, I don't think after Hazem, my brother's explanation of Zionism, that I need to explain why this motion is so necessary and what Zionism is. It's both its ideology and its practice since its inception has always been racist, and that's at the bare minimum, as you said. It's discrimination, it's supremacy, it's apartheid, it's genocide, and its practices fascism. You know, there's fascist practices that dictate to us, and it's not limited to us in Palestine, as we're witnessing it here in our own arenas, in our institutions, in our authorities. We are dictated by the same practices and the same oppressors. It's a global threat. It's not limited to Palestine. We're seeing its expansion across Syria, Lebanon, Iran, and beyond. And the reason why this motion was so important to be brought, especially here, was because this is the beginning. It began here in the racist belly of this beast with its Balfour declarations and imposing this monster upon us in the first place. So here we are, the children of the diaspora, returning as the mouthpiece and the voices of our families and our friends back home, in honor of those that have been slaughtered, that have been martyred, that fought for us to exist. For our uncles and our cousins, we do it in their names, in their honor. For my grandmother, who left this world with a broken heart, with nothing but wanting to go back home. And she couldn't. And now my father is here in the same position, his hopes only ever to return, but to a free Palestine. And until he can, we're going to fight like hell till we get that. And even if we don't see it in our generation, it is now our duty to carry that torch for those that are left and for those that are to come. So with this motion, we have declared there's 8 key points. And the main demand is that the party declares itself anti-Zionist. Now, for any party, I mean, that's the bare minimum. If you oppose racism, you will too oppose Zionism. Then it supports the establishment of a single democratic Palestinian state, equal rights for all. That's the biggest crime in town with this motion. The right of return for all Palestinians and their descendants, to support reparations, accountability, and our right to resist by all available means, as according to international law, and to reject the normalization of the subjugation of Palestinians, and that includes through use of definitions, and I'm sure we're all very much acquainted with the IHRA and JDA definitions of anti-Semitism, which have been weaponized to silence dissent and the criticism Israel so rightly deserves, and they're conflating with it anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. So this motion cuts through the conflations and therefore with it the weaponization of these definitions. By technicality, I would like to explain that that little section naming the definitions has been removed by the Standing Orders Committee on a technical issue, but it still remains that we reject those definitions. So again, this is something that we're continuing to challenge, and I'd like to point out, I mean, that is a sweeping across the movement. BMA have just also passed a motion rejecting the IHRA definition. The Young Greens, also setting a precedent in the party, they have rejected the IHRA definition. They have declared themselves and also, well, brought in two candidates in their hustings. They won as staunch, vocal, non-apologetic anti-Zionists. The tide is turning. The other demands of the motion are to support also the release of our prisoners back home, including Marwan Barghouti and other political prisoners, as well as the prisoners here, all prisoners that basically are in prison for taking non-violent direct action against Israel's genocidal war machine. And that's the short of it. There are a few basic other points in there, but I've written the thing, so it's like you have to regurgitate it over and over again. If I have missed anything, BDS, how can I miss that? But not, and this is important for all of our campaigns, the BDS, we've asked for this to be implemented in the same respect as it was with apartheid South Africa, and this is full BDS and embargoes, and not limited, as we're seeing unfortunately to the UN prescribed list, which is only like 5% of the investments, and it still continues to normalize and endorse the apartheid state of Israel and its genocidal practices. And until that's dismantled, we're never going to have liberation. We can never truly call ourselves anti-racist or truly claim that we support democracy. This system has proven nothing but full of hypocrisy, of racism, discrimination, not just to us as Palestinians. But this is like beyond the litmus test. It's a test of compliance. How compliant will the world remain in the face of such injustice? Because if we aren't going to tackle this head on today, then who is it going to be tomorrow? And so the demands of this motion, quite basic, some classify it as controversial. The only thing that's controversial is their racism and the fact that they can call such a motion that's steeped in international law, Geneva Convention, Equality Act, as controversial or unpalatable. I mean, the only way Palestinians are going to be palatable to these types is when we just die quietly. When we talk about resistance, or you're terrorists. When you reject Zionism, or you're anti-Semitic. You talk about those who've resisted before, okay, you're promoting terrorism, okay. Again, and then it goes into the Hamas cycle, and you're just like, okay, well, who are Hamas? And then don't forget, every oppressed person has a right to resist. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And if it weren't for those who resisted before us, I mean, even here, the hypocrisy when we talk about, those who go to the cenotaph to pay their respects for those who fought in those world wars. Lest we forget, Palestinians also fought in those. And if it wasn't for those that fought, where would we be? But when it comes to Palestinian lives, we're terrorists. And you have to condemn ourselves, and we have to condemn our resistance. It's sickening. And it's the same that was applied, the Jews who fought in the Warsaw ghettos, they were terrorists. The Congolese were terrorists. The Irish were terrorists. The South Africans, we're all terrorists. Okay, that's a label that we're going to have to bear for fighting against injustice, for fighting against our erasure, then so be it. We'll be happily, you're labeled anti-Semitic Hamas terrorists. I don't care. We've been smeared for this motion being brought. We were reported to counter-terror police. We were dragged through literally every legacy media paper, smeared. Candidates were targeted, those who were pro-Palestinian. It was like another Labour 2.0 witch hunt taking place. We've had knuckle-down accusations and threats for UK NFI, the Israeli embassy, the Israeli minister, the British Board of Deputies, anti-Semitism advisor to Keir Starmer. And then there's the death threats. People turn up at my house. I've had threats with guns. And that's the rest of it. It carries on. But the thing is, there's nothing. None of that. There is absolutely nothing they can do to us or say to us or smear us with that's worse than what they're already doing to our families and our people back home. And the price to pay for that and for not speaking up against that is far higher than whatever they want to threaten us with and accuse us of. And if being Palestinian and if opposing our genocide makes me criminal or makes me guilty, then fine, charge me as such. I'm guilty. But I will continue until my last dying breath to speak, to fight, and to resist against this oppression and this motion and the hit back, the pushback that we've organised. And I must tell you, it's by all means the least radical party. You wouldn't expect Green Party to be accommodating of this, but believe me, I've met some of the greatest people in there who are an absolute solid team with us. And this motion, when I brought it, I was told there's no way the Green Party are going to pass something like that. And I said, it's not even about having the endorsement of political arena for this. It's about addressing the narrative. It's about Palestinian voices coming forward and talking about that which we've been denied for decades, to confront it in the same arenas that began it. And unless we put it on the menu, no one's going to order it. Until we have that discussion and we can educate, no one will know any better, and it will just continue. So it was about confronting that. But something actually really beautiful happened. People, I think, sadly it's taken so long, so many decades of suffering, of oppression to get here, but witnessing the genocide, which our brave people back home have filmed. They've been literally filming and live streaming their annihilation for the world to bear witness to, and as painful as it is to see, we cannot look away, and I refuse to look away, because we are here to tell the truth and the stories and be the voices that they are denied back home, and to carry those stories. And this is proof. The world is bearing witness. And finally, it feels like it's enough. They've seen enough. I've grown up watching it year after year. Another carpet bombing, let's mow the lawn again. Another Palestinian shot dead. It's just like a Malay. No one even knows. I grew up in areas where they're like, what's a Palestinian? Where's that? The whole world now knows where Palestine is. And the people have joined us, and this motion ended up setting a record. It broke its record, the party's record of the number of co-proposers it attracted. And in spite of all the attacks, there was a huge, was anyone here in the spring conference? Yeah, I'm sorry, my condolences to you too. That was a bloody awful experience. There have been articles and talks about it. That was, I think you would agree with me there, right? Zionism in action. It was something else. But what it did do is it has opened the eyes of everyone in that party, even those that may not have been so well acquainted with the practices of Zionism. There it was. We were all witness to that in action. The filibustering, the repeat of breach of party process and policy, the abuses of the party's mechanisms, anything just to stop this motion being heard. I mean, I won't go into the long-winded story of that, but it has sent a message not just about this motion and the demands of it, and educated those and let everyone bear witness to what Zionism is in action in our democratic processes, being completely derailed by them, but also about the abuse of authority, of power, and internal corruption. This has exposed so much more about the issues here in our own institutions and our own political arenas, and many problems that need to and will be and are being now addressed as a result of that. It's been exposed. And our team have done some amazing work in pushing back against those attacks, in defending the members that have been suspended. We are not repeating the same mistakes that were made in Corbyn-led era. And we cannot afford to make those capitulations, and we will not be apologetic for things we did not do and did not say. And these candidates, I would just like to clarify, many of you might have seen some of the smear campaigns where they were accused of anti-Semitism. Many were actually accused of things they didn't say. This was legacy media dragging their names through the mud, saying that they did to Corbyn. And one case in particular, she was one of the leaks from inside the party had decided, now let's go for her, brown Muslim woman, and a majority of those targeted were actually Muslim and global majority. There is a really serious increase in anti-Muslim discrimination and anti-Palestinian racism and global majority racism. Basically, this the attacks. It was disgusting. They accused her of saying things, attributed comments to her that she didn't say, that came from someone else. They smeared that through legacy media, then went after her work, a charity she'd set up, been running for like 20 years, to destroy it, doxed her. Then she got arrested by the police, again, for things she didn't do and didn't say. And they expect us to just be scaremongered into silence and go out quietly. We're hitting back. When they hit you with a stick, you have to hit them with a sledgehammer. I'm sorry, but it's the only way that they're going to learn. And because everybody's been so timid, is the timid tiptoeing around it, and the capitulation that has permitted and given way for this to occur. But the moment you start confronting them and exposing them and hitting back at this, they start stepping back. They're not used to that. They've not been on the receiving end of their own assaults. So self-defense is no offense, and we are proud to be returning with this motion, and there are more attempts, as though that wasn't enough. In fact, they're going to come down. There's a few things we're anticipating, to say the least, and we're prepared, and we have mass support. And not only now has that garnered support, it's doubled its support since the last conference. They thought that would scare everyone away and that we'd all retreat, when in fact it's almost doubled its last record. And beyond that, it's gone. This has reached from here to Australia. It's a movement. It's not merely a motion. These are the same basic demands of that every living being who opposes injustice and stands for equality and is against racism will be supporting and standing for and endorsing. And this is the change, the tide that we now have to push. There's many people here and abroad, different motions of this have passed in trade union branches, in other branches of other pro-Palestine organizations, and are reaching political parties in Ireland and other places, actually globally. So it's a seed that's been planted, and it's not limited to the Green Party. It doesn't begin or end here, but it's one nonetheless that we're really happy to share this journey with you, and hope that you will be a part of it, even if you're not in the Green Party. I still encourage you to join it, even if it's just for this, or whatever party you're with, table it to your party and your branches. And let's pass this motion. Let's dismantle Zionism, and let's free Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lubna. Basically, as you were talking, actually, I was reminded of something else. Who remembers that parliamentary debate on the Israel lobby? I don't know if anyone saw it. I don't know if anyone here saw it as well. But, I mean, I was unfortunate enough to watch it, and the overwhelming number of MPs who were pro-Zionist and pro-Israeli was just unbelievable. And again, they were conflating Judaism with Zionism. And as I was watching that, I was thinking this is one of the reasons why your motion is very, very important, because it kind of sends within the Houses of Parliament the message that basically Zionism is racism, basically towards the Palestinian people and other people. And it kind of sends that message to the actual establishment itself, which is where Zionism is very, very, very pervasive in. I mean, if you want to get an example, just watch that debate, basically. That's what I would say. Just watch that debate and just look at how many number of MPs didn't want to talk about that debate because the subject was Israel. I mean, like, if it was anyone else, it was Russian influence, Chinese influence, I think people would want to talk about it. But the number of MPs were coming up on the table saying, we normally welcome this debate, but we can't single out Israel, etc., etc. It kind of showed to me how Zionism is pervasive within Parliament, and we need a strong message within Parliament to challenge Zionism itself. And one of the ways is actually your motion. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I do want to stick to this subject of how Zionism is inherently racist towards the Palestinians on this theme a little bit. And one of the things that I have come across is that within the history of the movement, it kind of changes its vocabulary in regards to what it is, in regards to the times. So, for example, Theodore Herzl described it as something colonial to his letter to Cecil Rhodes, because colonialism wasn't seen as a bad thing back then. But now, obviously, colonialism is seen as a bad thing, rightfully so. And now we have progressive values that are on the rise. So now what I'm seeing is that certain parts of the Zionist movement are coming out and rebranding Zionism as an indigenous movement, basically. And the biggest group of that is in Israel itself. They're called the Indigenous Coalition for Israel, which are like a group of Arab Israeli citizens, basically, who are Zionists as well, and they're trying to reclaim their indigeneity on the land via Zionism. And I say that to say this. Obviously, we know that the Palestinians are the indigenous people of that territory. But how do you understand indigeneity? What are the criteria of indigeneity, and how do Palestinians fit within that criteria? Hazem, do you mind answering that question?
So I think, to say someone is indigenous is to say someone is from the place. But then, people in Bavaria who are, 50th generation Bavarian generally will not refer to themselves as indigenous, or someone who's 50th generation from Yorkshire will not usually refer to themselves as indigenous to Yorkshire. It grammatically would make sense, but that's not how people would talk about it. Colonialism creates indigeneity, right? So what makes you, in effect, indigenous is the fact that someone else has come and laid claim to your land. And so really it's the colonist and the native. The native is the indigenous person. But it's not also just a fact of family and geography. There's something else that comes from this, which is the relationship to the land, which is really, really fundamental when we think about indigenous people from the settler colony of Australia, through the settler colonies of the Americas, through the settler colonies in Southern Africa, and so on and so forth, which is that people who we would talk about as indigenous have a relationship to the land as caretakers of the land, not owners of the land. Private property is something that actually comes in with the colonizer and capitalism. But there is a notion that this land needs, first of all, my ancestors are buried in this land, so it's due a certain respect. This land has fed and nourished my entire line, so there's a respect that's due. But also, this land needs to nourish my descendants. 7 and 10 centuries from now, this land is generous. Not just the land of Palestine. If you're indigenous to a land, then that land is thought of as something that's also needs to feed and nourish, not just as food and harvest, but in every single possible way. those future generations, right? So across indigenous communities, it would just be a commonplace that this is how we think of the land. But then the reality of capitalism and colonialism coming in and starting to use the land as something we extract from, as something that we, in the process, also destroy. So if we think of kind of like huge swaths of the Indian subcontinent where bauxite is mined to make aluminum, this destroys the land forever, right? If we think about gold mining, diamond mining, think about what Israel is doing to the Dead Sea for extraction of potash. If we think about the transformation of landscapes, even, I mean, the land doesn't just give us food and clean, it gives us beauty. And to come in and destroy this beauty by implanting settlements, transforming these things into agro-business plantations, right? Changing our associations of the place that we think of as home and beautiful and nourishing to sites of death and destruction. If we think about also how, for instance, Palestinians from Gaza will talk about Gaza, right? Even despite the harshness of the blockade, the harshness of the hunger before 2023, the harshness of the mowing the lawn, the kind of continual bombing campaigns and murder, it's still a talk about how beautiful we made it, how beautiful our interaction with the land enabled a beauty to life despite all the ugliness that the colonizer brings in. The colonizer doesn't care, right? And so when we look at these settler colonies, from white South Africa to the United States to Canada, what beauty remains is despite the colonist, right? What beauty was there has been transformed into, how can I make money off of this? What's under the land? As soon as the colonizers come in, they come in with their geologists. What's on this when Columbus comes, right? The first thing he sees is he's like, oh wow, these people who are here are dark-skinned and beautiful. They would make great slaves. And as soon as he lands, they start giving people quotas of how much gold they need to deliver to the colonizer. And then the companies come in and start mining for that gold and looking for what else is precious here that we can profit off of. It's a completely different relationship to the land. It's what can this land be, what kind of money can I turn this land into? And so this I think is really fundamental to indigeneity, is the fact that colonialism kind of creates it, right, as its other, and that colonialism comes in with this extractivist logic that just sees the land and its population as sources of profit and revenue and extraction, completely disregarding how to sustain it. It's completely disregarding the way of life. I mean, and this is also why there's no coincidence that you end up with forest fires and droughts in California and in Palestine. They come in and they plant the kinds of trees that they're going to make money off of. Or they physically, in the case of Palestine, the Zionists came in and planted German pine trees to make it look German on purpose, to hide what it would look like, right? That whole notion of we made the desert bloom, however much of a lie it is, what they mean by bloom is we made the land profitable and we devastated it ecologically. Deserts aren't supposed to bloom except when they bloom. It's a desert. And a desert does not mean dead. Deserts are teeming with life. But when you come and turn it into something else, you kill that life. And this is the colonizer's mentality, right? So I think a fundamental part of the indigeneity is a blurred line between human and environment. Is that we are this is a connected system. And if you break something in that connection, this leads to death. And this is why colonialism is death. It's not just that the colonizer comes in with Bibles and rifles. It's that the colonizer comes in with an impetus and a need to transform the systems on that land and that connection between the humans and the land itself into something else that is deathly, right, and is ghastly.
Lubna, if you've got something to say as well, just come in, basically.
There's nothing really much to add to that, but what indigenous people to a land would do that. You know how precious every inch of that land, even down to the insects, which we care for, the birds whose sounds you can no longer hear for over the bombs and the drowned out by drones. It's the kids grow up hearing, like being able to identify which gun is being used to shoot. what drone that is, what missile that is, rather than growing up to hear the sound of birdsong and like you would hear. And it's like being in a completely different planet altogether. I was in West Bank last year, and when I came back, I was so disorientated. And the guilt as well of being able to leave that while they're trapped in a slaughterhouse. And you watch what they do to the land. They're not just raping and pillaging from the people, they're doing it to the land too, and to the animals. I mean, you see the settlers attacking, even our dogs are not spared. They beat them to death with clubs. They tie donkeys to the back of their trucks and drag them through the rough terrain to their death. Like, what level of psychopathy is that? What indigenous people does that to the animals of the land? Rips out ancient olive trees sown by the hands of our grandmothers. This is not the behavior or the acts of any indigenous people. They are the people, and the proof is there, are those who cling to those trees and guard them with their life and care for those animals. And in the case of Palestine, that is the Palestinians. And we don't need to see any more than that. No book, no lectures, no, you don't need to be a historian or a legal expert to see that this is wrong. That's happening now. And we're bearing witness to that. And we're witness to who the true native or indigenous people, as they call it, are. Thank you.
Just on the other part of your question, which was about Zionist indigeneity, right? So this was this thing of Zionism is a return, and this new kind of counter argument of like, but we're indigenous, so we have the right to do what we're doing. So, I mean, I think it should be obvious, but we're going to spell it out anyway. When Zionism started, there was already a massive Jewish population in Palestine, right? So it's not like there were no Jewish people in Palestine. There actually were significant parts of the city of Safa, of Jerusalem, and other parts of the country. And they were Jewish Palestinians who spoke Arabic, and would be indistinguishable from any Christian or Muslim or atheist or agnostic Palestinian. This is the mosaic of that land. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other is that when the Zionists came, they came. Nobody stopped them. If you were Jewish from Poland or from New York or from London, and you wanted to move to Palestine before 1948, you moved to Palestine. Nobody stopped you, just like Armenian refugees and Circassian refugees and Malian pilgrims and people coming from Eritrea and Ethiopia and people coming from all over the world, Jewish and not Jewish. If you wanted to come to Palestine, you could have gone to Palestine. People were coming to pray, people were coming and deciding to stay, people were marrying into the community. So it's not like Jewish people were not allowed to come and Zionism somehow came and opened the door. If anything, Zionism made it, and this is a big euphemism, made it extremely awkward for Jewish Palestinians because they're Palestinians, they're part of this indigenous community, and all of a sudden these people claiming this connected identity of Judaism, but they're Zionists, are coming in and saying, well, we want to take this land, but only for us. We want to kick everyone else out. Which means for a Jewish Palestinian, you want to kick out my neighbors and the people I went to school with and the people that buy from my shop and that I buy from and who babysit my kids. And so awkward is the softest way we can put that. The first people who were really raising the alarm about Zionism in the Palestinian community were Jewish Palestinians because they were reading the Hebrew press. So they understood Zionism a bit kind of early on. I mean, Jewish Palestinians and elite Palestinians who read foreign newspapers. The other thing is that, okay, I mean, if you want this kind of indigenous return, you know, I'm not going to tell you what to think. Like, it's historically spurious, but okay, like, I'm not going to come and, I mean, we can debate it historically. But then why exclude everybody else? Like, if you're indigenous to something, and you've been away for a while, and now you want to go back, and you're allowed to go back, all of which now we're following the story as it happened. Or at what point does your indigeneity mean excluding everybody else? Palestinians are, okay, so we've talked about how Palestinians are indigenous. They never said like, oh, like we're a Palestinian nation now. All these Armenians who came as refugees from the genocide of the Armenians need to leave because they're not indigenous enough. Or these people who have darker skin or lighter skin or other religions or speak another language at home because they're Greek Orthodox or whatever it is. Oh, these people, don't fit the full-on indigeneity, so they need to leave. That was never. There's no indigenous community in the world who is ethno-supremacist in that way. Because again, to be indigenous is to have experienced colonialism, and to have experienced colonialism is to have experienced that kind of deep institutional racism, and to have experienced that kind of deep institutional racism is to have an anti-racist analysis, hopefully. You do have people who will come out with a kind of counter-xenophobia. And we don't really have it. You won't really see it in Palestine. So it's like, well, as with most Zionist arguments, by the way, you can accept all the argument and then say, and so, right? We can accept, so all of the lies that were said about October 7th, right? We spend a lot of time being like, these are lies. There's no proof. Like, you kind of made all of this up. Actually, we know who made it up. It was those two people who gave those interviews. And then it got picked up by, like, Biden. But even if we were to accept that, does that justify killing 100,000 people and destroying the entire Gaza Strip? Let's go back to the Nakba. It was like, their arguments at the time were that Arab leaders issued radio broadcasts telling Palestinians to leave, and so Palestinians left. It's the most ridiculous argument, as if you would leave your house because of a radio broadcast. But let's accept it. Let's say yes. And then they say, the Arab armies came and attacked, and that created a war, and that's why Palestinians fled. Okay, let's accept that. Let's accept all of your arguments. Why weren't Palestinians allowed home once the war ended? Right? Okay, they heard a radio broadcast and they left. 1 million people left because they heard a radio broadcast. Sure, buddy, sure. Okay, the war ended. Why didn't you allow them back? Okay, you're indigenous to the land and you're returning after 2,000 years. Welcome back. Why'd you gotta kill me and force me out and not allow me back? I don't accept your indigeneity, but I accept if you want to think that. Fine. And so what? Right? And by the way, this works for almost every single Zionist argument. They'll draw you into it because it's a lie, and you're just like, this isn't right. We need to bash the lie. We need to expose the lie. And we get sucked into exposing the lie, and it's not wrong to want to have our facts straight, right? And to just understand what is this history, what is the reality. But also ask yourself every time you hear a Zionist argument, and does this really justify what you did? Does it justify what you're saying it justifies? Your indigeneity justifies mass eradication of the other indigenous. Let's say all the Palestinians showed up in Palestine in 1870 from Crete, right? Like some super imagined argument. Okay, they were only there for 20 years before the Zionist movement. And you were there all along, actually. We just didn't know it. And, right? So, no, they're not indigenous. But even if they were, if we accepted the entire fabricated history that Zionism offers us, it doesn't justify a single murder. It doesn't justify a single expulsion. It doesn't justify a single expropriation of land.
Thank you so much. I got one more question to ask. Just one more before I open up to the floor. This is a question that's I've been meaning to ask around because I don't think it gets talked enough. In fact, I did bring it up in one of our G4P meetings when we were talking about stuff. But the thing is that we kind of alluded to it here. Obviously, when we talk about colonialism and ethnic cleansing, it's all about removing people from the land. But when it comes to Palestinians, it also seems like Palestinian history has been erased. Like, not many people talk about Palestinian history. When we talk about it, it's always about the Nakba, what happened afterwards, or even just prior to the Nakba, maybe 1936 now because of the film and all that other kind of stuff. But because you mentioned William Dalrymple, I saw his interview on Palestine Deep Dive when he said that even talking about Salahuddin, the Palestinians in the back, they're not even in the background. Like, literally, they're just completely missing from the narrative of the Crusades, and it's something that got him interested. I just want to know, from your opinions, we all know, but just for the purposes of people watching, what role does the erasure of a people's history, what role does that do to ensure the current status, the survival of the current status quo in regards to this context, Israel-Palestine? Because again, just another example, when you look at the documentary by William Thoreau, for example, The Settlers, obviously a lot of people were bigging it up and all that kind of stuff. I kind of realized, hold on, the settlers were allowed to talk about their history going back millennia ago, but there's no Palestinian history narrative there. What role does the erasure of Palestinian history, what's the role of the erasure of Palestinian history, basically? I just want to know your opinions and maybe yours as well.
The short of it is to participate in the erasure of us, people who didn't exist, people, land for people without a land, right? It's this same, it's part of the lean propaganda machine, the same machine that continually denies our rights or denies our existence or denies our right to resist. And that's ultimately the short. It's hell-bent and intent on denying Palestinian agency, to deny everything, every single right that we have. And if they can use that as a justification like they did with the Seventh, this was their pretext to justify the unjustifiable, a genocide. And this is the same thing that the media who pay, they're highly responsible and very much participants in our erasure, the same way they did to the Congolese. And the first thing is obviously to not talk about it, not educate, not let people understand the Palestinian struggle, not let people see the reality, which is why there's been this sort of like blanket ban on so much of what's happening in Palestine. And now the attacks that as we're seeing in the West Bank, many mainstream medias won't talk about it. It's part of this denial, this justification, fueling also the dehumanization of the Palestinians. And this is an interesting time that we're in, because we have access, with social media and independent news channels, and that, I think, is where we need to focus and keep pressuring the media. Like, the things that we're doing are sending shockwaves, and they will reach a point, like, they cannot ignore it. And the more that we're out here even doing this, but one thing I do feel is important, I know it's straying off, but I'm always like solution focused, so my head goes into, this is a problem, how do we fix it? Is to come out of our echo chambers and to go and have these conversations with the people that we would generally avoid or avoid having them with, or the average Joe. I mean, I'll be standing in a shopping market or something, or going for a walk, and someone will see either my coffee or notice my necklace, or we'll get into a random conversation about a dog, and then it's awful to see what they're doing to our dogs in Palestine. Did you know this is what they're like? No, and then you spark and begin that conversation. On the rare occasion, it might get hostile, and it depends on what kind of a day I'm having and how I respond. But the point is, it's that dialogue that embraces and encourages people to learn more, or directing them. Like, most of these people I've spoken to people who are like, come up to our rally and they're like, hey, I don't know if I can swear on this, but F off back home to your country, right? And this is the thing, they say it to my dad, right? And you sit there and think the irony. And then you go into the history, you're like, do you know why my father can't go back to his country? It's because of your country. It's because of this. And how it affects them too. It's not just and it's not a Palestinian issue. This is a Zionist issue. It's their problem. And it's a problem that also then becomes the world's problem, because they're permitting this. And when you go through, and these are people who haven't, and you have to remember in your minds, okay, they've probably never met a Palestinian. They've never met a Muslim. Like, how do they know any different if this is all they're exposed to? It's just this mainstream propaganda. And then you take these as an opportunity to educate. You're like, okay, I'm the first Palestinian or the first Muslim that they've ever met. Let's have this conversation. Let's ask them, what is it that you think that's so bad? And then you debunk and demyth all the fabrications and demonization of us through the media. And I mean, by the end of some of these discussions, I have had tears, I've had apologies. They've shaken my hand and said, I'm so sorry. Like, and I can't believe you've even entertained this discussion with me. And I said, look, I just ask for you to go and maybe have these discussions with other people that thought the same as you. And I understand why you're secluded in your circle, and it's the same with us. If we're just sit here talking amongst ourselves and not speak to anyone else, we will never educate beyond ourselves. And many people who have come in through the movement, in seeing what's happening, have obviously changed their position. Many didn't understand the difference between one state, two state. They thought, oh, this is fair, two state. That's all that's ever been pumped into everybody. But there's been a shift. Now many people have been, I'm sorry that I even thought that was a solution. I mean, we're witnessing that there's no possibility of that. Israel have said it verbally and in practice that they will never permit the existence of a Palestinian state. And of course it doesn't end at Palestine. So I think the importance is not what is what they're doing, but is how we address it. And it's in having these conversations with those that we might not ordinarily, and giving them the right tools and introducing them to alternative media and books, and let them be educated, let them understand, and let them come and join us on this journey. Thank you.
Yeah, just briefly, I'm trained as a historian academically, so there's something that's really fundamentally wrong with the way that history is taught and the way that people think about history, which is we take the sort of nation-state identities of today and we push them back to an eternity of the past. And so people 2,000 years ago were English and French and German and Palestinian, and they were that as well 1,000 years ago, and they're that today. And nothing can be farther from the truth. And the thing is that within our own lives, we should know better. We somehow think that migration is just maybe during our lifetimes or in the last 5 minutes or something. We think that kind of like marriage across communities is something new. It's actually really, really age old. And the point here is to think, these categories that we use for identities today are thoroughly modern categories, and they're very malleable. So if we think about Palestine as a geographical space, those people that we read about ostensibly in the Old Testament, the story of Jesus, the story of the Canaanites and the Phoenicians, King David, Goliath, these are all Palestinians, right? I mean, in terms of these are the people inhabiting this space. Over these thousands of years, they intermarried, they moved over to the next village, somebody ran out of money and had to get away, somebody eloped and had to get away. That all of the things that we know happen today, those kinds of personal dynamics, maybe it didn't happen because of the internet back then, but other than that, they were happening for similar reasons, wars, etc. But those same people who get characterized as Phoenicians and Canaanites and Jews and Paliset and Goliath and Sumer, those are the same people. Those are those same villagers. They may have switched kind of devotional practices and what they thought the divine was. They may have been multilingual in one group of languages at one point, and those sets of languages changed over time. We don't speak Aramaic anymore, but those same people who spoke Aramaic, their descendants are the ones who spoke Greek and spoke Arabic and spoke Hebrew and spoke all of these other languages. This kind of clean division of lines between communities, and these are categories we have mentally. They don't exist, right? What makes them exist now is identity documents, the global border regime. That's hardened those identities. But if we go not too far in the past, that's much more fluid. And even today, it's much more fluid. We just refuse to see it, right? So this is the thing with Palestine's history, is that all of these stories are our ancestors, right? Whether they believed in this God or that, spoke this language or that language, if they were living in the villages and cities and towns of Palestine, chances are they're the ancestors of the people who are today in Palestine, of the indigenous Palestinians. And we have to kind of keep that in mind, right? And yes, the history of Palestine, I mean, in a lot of places, the greatest blessing is also the greatest curse. In the case of Palestine, we have this very literal blessing of being this place that's very important to a lot of religious communities. Understatement, right? And this is what brought a lot of attention, but it also is the reason why kind of, pilgrims would come to Palestine and not see us, and would just see past us to some imagined thing about their kind of religious story. Whether it's Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj and Al-Aqsa Mosque for Muslims, or the story of Jesus for Christians, or the story of where Moses crossed into for Jews, that becomes the thing that's sort of most clear and invisibilizes us. Or the story of Salah ad-Din, like William. But part of this is also to recognize that when Salah ad-Din, Saladin, comes in and fights the Battle of Hittin and kicks out the Crusaders to Akka before they're fully kicked out, people in Palestine aren't seeing him as some foreign ruler coming in, right? This is another thing, is the borders of Palestine, even though we talk about one state and stuff, this is a way of us talking about how to fight Zionism. But when we want to think about actually how people relate to the geography and the space, historically, the Palestine borders are the border drawn by the British Mandate. That's not our border. In fact, the entire set of borders in the region is, for us in the region, who are indigenous to the region, the main manifestation of colonialism. For us, to be anti-colonial in our region is to fight against borders. Because these borders didn't exist before. And even in the age of my grandfather, as recent as my grandfather, who lived and worked in Amman, Jordan, he would pop over to Jerusalem for lunch. Because the distance between Amman and Jerusalem is the distance from here to Oxford. Right? The distance between Jerusalem and Gaza is the distance between here and Oxford. This is a distance that is uncrossable for the last tens of years, right? So it's actually a distance of 1 billion miles. You can get to the moon more easily than you can get to Gaza. Very literally, you can get to the moon more easily than you can get to Gaza. But just something for us to keep in mind. When we want to think about this history, we really should catch ourselves using the categories that we've been inculcated in today and sort of projecting them onto the past. And even projecting them onto the present.
Thank you guys so much. Yes, also just, we're talking about the theme of history. The one book that I was thinking of is Nur Musalhal's book, 4,000 Years of Palestinian History. If you haven't read that, go ahead and please buy it and give it a read. Okay, I'm going to open it up to the floor now for questions. I think we'll take maybe 2 questions at a time. Yeah, let's take 2 questions at a time. Lady over there, and then the lady over there. So, Tim, do you want to give it to her first?
The United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3379, adopted in 1975, that determined that Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination. So that was then later revoked. I think it was in 1991. But with that precedent, why is it so difficult to talk about this and to make this happen again?
Yes, thank you. A question for Hazem. You paint a very apocalyptic picture of the future with aspiring supremacist states popping up around the world and copying Israel and Zionism. But there are a whole group of very respectable academics and historians who argue that now Israel is in decline, imploding, the genocide's been exposed, everybody's seen it on TV. Young Jewish Americans don't support Israel as their parents did. The attack on Iran has exposed the weaknesses of America. So there's a body of work which is saying, well, maybe Israel won't exist, 50 years from now. How do you reconcile your vision with that?
So, the first question was UN Resolution 3379, Zionism is racism, which was revoked, I think, because of the Oslo Accords and the Oslo Agreement. Why is it so difficult to talk about that, that Zionism is racism, given the fact that we've had this precedent?
Well, that was repealed to accommodate the Madrid Peace Conference, and of course we have never seen peace before since, and which is why we're bringing it back, and that led to the Oslo Accords, one of many denial of Palestinian rights, and now we're here, and it was a political maneuver, but it never changed the fact or denied the fact that Zionism is indeed racism, a form, they declared it a form of racism and discrimination. Well, it's that and so much worse. And if this isn't enough for the world to witness, or be enough reason for you to at least acknowledge what it is, then God help us all. But this is exactly why we've returned with it. And yes, there is pushback, because for them to acknowledge that, they're then acknowledging their own racism. It's like the same reason why they deny genocide. Let's deny it, let's pretend it's not happening, because we're all participant in it. So at the moment we acknowledge that there's a genocide, and we're fueling it, and we're denying the racism behind it, then it removes the culpability. So here we are confronting all of it head on and bringing it back. And people are aware, and it has sparked that debate that has been so missing for so long. And with it brought the question of what Israel means. The fact that its very existence, it can only exist on the subjugation of the Palestinian people. And here we're witnessing our erasure live streamed, and the failure to act now is a failure for everything that we claim to stand for. So yeah, there is pushback, because they're trying to protect themselves from the realities of what they are, and that includes all of the institutions that continue to push against it. But we, the people, are returning, and we are speaking and using whatever mechanisms and whatever means we can to confront it. So it's not a matter of they can't, it's we are forcing them to face it, the reality of what they've done and how we must address it. I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah, I want to know whether it could be used, to kind of reinstate, with those arguments that were used.
We've actually sent it to people in the UN. We're hoping it does bring it back, but the work that we're doing is fueling that. It's setting the ground. There's so much more I'd like to tell everyone. There's so much going on in the background. Some things I'm bound by confidentiality to, unfortunately. But we are paving the way for that and so much more. The work that we're doing is sending that message. It's the driving force for this. And that takes it to the UN. But the UN has made some huge errors. Like, we can't just set our bar by the UN, or even if the laws like the Terrorism Act 2000, which I am strongly in opposition to, and hope we repeal that, along with the anti-trade union legislation. And it's about confronting everything that's wrong in our system, and this exposes everything that's wrong with our system, and for us to organize, is to find ways to unite with each other and organize to dismantle all these chains of repression. And that includes the way that they've weaponized it to increase their state repression here. So, yeah, there are things in the pipeline. And it's the same. It was like the IOF case. I've been in the background doing that for like a year. And now it's come out because we've forced the Met that to acknowledge, because there's a law that they sort of overlooked, that now permits them to continue the investigation. So, again, it sends that message that accountability is coming, and that we must continue to persist and resist by whatever means we can. Thank you.
And I think it's important to keep in mind that this isn't just about winning the argument, this is about power, right? Whether it's at the UN, like the UN resolution would never have been passed had it not been for a majority in the General Assembly having become, formerly colonized, now independent states, but had a very strong antipathy to colonialism and its forms of racism, and passed that resolution in the 1970s. And it was the New World Order, Bush the first regime, that repealed it. Again, it was a story of power. And I think it's the same with the question that you asked me. So I'm sorry if I gave any impression that a world of supremacist states is the inevitable future. Nothing is inevitable. It is a question of power. Are we going to be able to organize against it? What is very clear is that Israel is at the spearhead of a group of movements worldwide that call themselves different things. Remigration seems to be the word they really like, which means mass expulsion of everybody who's not white and not one of the kind of core group. But really we just call it fascism, right? So that we have a kind of fascist international that has formed and is very explicit that they meet. Like, they are very explicit that the idea for Brexit was brought up to a group of people from these fascist movements from around the world in the United States. Steve Bannon says this on a podcast with The Economist, 2 years before any of us heard the word Brexit. Right? And until today, they are meeting and they are drawing on each other's successes and examples and saying, okay, so for instance, and the real trailblazers are Israel and the Trumpists. So it's like, okay, what policies have you passed? What can we learn from this? How are we going to pass it here? So that same Steve Bannon interview, he gushes in joy at the fact that Nigel Farage is now able to talk about mass expulsion of migrants in a way that he wasn't able to a few years ago. He's like, in Britain, they've advanced so much. Right? So this is and Israel really is the fundamental model. So all of them recognize that the goal is to be able to pass laws the way Israel passes laws, which is to say, laws that enable mass murder, mass expropriation of property, this institutionalized discrimination that is blatant and on the books, and you can take a picture of it, you can see it. So that is a power that exists, and this isn't marginal. These are states with armies and budgets and hasbara, PR machines and embassies and all of the trappings of that, as well as the fact that their most recent slew of really crucial allies is the tech billionaires, right? For whom the Reform Party wasn't right-wing enough. And so they funded a whole new, further right, more fascist party, right? This is... and these people, it's not just that they are rich, it's that they control tech that is in every single pocket in this space, listening, answering our questions when we have them, and monitoring all of our activities, right? So they are powerful. This isn't a doomsday speech. There are so many examples where people have pushed back and won. So we are not fated to a world of supremacist regimes. Israel is most definitely on the back foot. On the level of, if we lived in actual democracies, right? If for instance, public opinion and majorities and how they would think and feel and act and vote determines policy, Israel would already be no more, right? But thanks to Israel, the lack of democracy has shown its really hideous face. I know you all have had these conversations and are even more clued into this stuff than I am. But in Britain, for instance, we have the first case where, a judge is just removed and replaced because he's unlikely to the judgment favorable to a foreign embassy. We have the case where the kind of lawyer confidentiality, client-lawyer privilege has been basically revoked, and a lawyer is now facing charges. We basically kind of fundamental constitutional principles are being amputated off of what was left of British and American and Canadian and German and French democracy in order to cater to continued support for the Zionist project and the State of Israel. This is not a fait accompli, and this is not inevitable, and this is not something that cannot be turned back. And we already have, not to over-celebrate this, but the election of the Democratic Socialists in the United States is really New York City is the largest Jewish city in the world, which means that a very large number of Jewish New Yorkers voted in Mamdani or participated in bringing him to power, right? So we have a party in the United Kingdom that was considered extremely marginal, is now considered a party that is a contender and is debating a Zionism is racism motion that has a very strong chance of passing. But again, none of this is inevitable or not. It's about what work gets put in, right? What do we do to make it happen? And so the question isn't like, is Israel's eternity inevitable and so on, or not? Is it fated to crumble? That's not a thing. It's what are we going to do to end Zionism's effect on the Palestinian people? What do we do to end Zionist supremacy? What are we going to do to stop fascism here? That's what determines the outcome, there are historical forces, there are people with a lot of power, with very different interests that they're investing all kinds of things to actualize, but then there's us, and we are not powerless, and the equivalents of us over time have shown that to be the case over and over and over again. So actually, the force of history is with us. It's just a question of, are we going to get our stuff together enough and get organized and clear-headed and be able to outmaneuver them and use the power we do have, which is the power of the people. It's not the power of billions of pounds. It's not the power of a lot of guns. It's not the power of being able to dictate policy. But it is the power of mass movement. It is the power of what levers we have on a micro level in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our workspaces, in our places of worship, in this kind of space, how we're able to interact with people who are walking by. These are the kinds of small, but they add up types of things that actually, historically, have made revolutions happen, have made all kinds of change happen. So nothing is inevitable. It's all determined by what kind of power and energy and effort people are going to put in.
Thank you. Okay, do we have another round of questions? Person at the beginning, Satish. So we go with the person that over there.
Thank you very much. This is really interesting. Obviously, Zionism is very much a racist, fascist, irredentist, ethnocentric ideology. Today, only one such ideology has been defeated and dumped into history, and that's German Aryanism and Nazism. But there are such others today, and what I've learned from this Palestinian struggle is, over the years, that it can't be complete unless we understand other racist, fascist, irredentist ideologies around the world and jointly fight against fascism, racism, ethnocentrism everywhere. So you have it, for example, in Turkey, where there's this disgusting, horrible racism against Syrian Arab refugees, driven very much by the official state ideology of Turkic, ethno-supremacy, secular nationalism, etc., which lead to some sort of like romantic notions of the Turkic world, and hence tolerating Azerbaijan's support for Israel. You have in Greece with this so-called Hellenic ideology, which is another fascist, racist, ethnocentric ideology, and I'm very much disappointed by comrades such as Yanis Varoufakis sometimes falling into this trap of Hellenism, but credit to him, he very much criticizes Greece's military alliance with Israel now. So really my question is, can the Palestinian struggle against this racist ideology of Zionism be complete and succeed if it doesn't identify with and be identified by other struggles against racism, fascism across the Middle East? To be honest, I can't see Palestine being liberated and this Zionist colonial scepter project coming to an end without radical changes around the Middle East. We have to defeat racism, Turkey, Kurdistan, Arab countries, etc., fight fascism there as well. And the struggle and liberation can only come through a joint struggle against fascism and racism. Thank you very much.
Hello. Hi, Lubna. Hi, Hazem. Thanks for coming. So I want to ask a question about the Greens. I guess apart from forcing the government to introduce an arms embargo and have sanctions against Israel, the biggest thing we can do in this country is get perhaps the local government pension schemes from divesting or their pensions from companies tied to Israel. So far we've got about 40 different resolutions that sort of purport to do that, but talk around it, that talk about reviews and stating the intention to do it, talk about human rights without mentioning Israel, talk about UN list, which amounts to about 5% of the total thing. And now we've had elections and we've had a lot of Green councillors who have been elected, who have often got elected, saying they're going to divest from Israel. We have a few councils that are controlled by Greens, or where Greens are the biggest parties, such as Southwark, Lewisham, Hackney, and now they've put forward. Sorry, someone got and they've put forward a. What the hell is this? Sorry, guys. Yes, so now we now have had these Green councillors and Green majorities, and they seem to have settled on a strategy, and they had some kind of a summit yesterday where they've settled on a statement drawn up by Islington PSC and Greens of Palestine that seems to again talking about human rights in general terms. Without mentioning Israel and trying to put this statement to the sieve, and it's again taking this roundabout way. So what do you think about this, as opposed to taking a more direct approach and having a direct councils accepting their actual responsibility they have and saying they're going to divest fully from all companies tied to Israel, and in the same manner as you might have a no cuts budget in the face of austerity, standing up to all legal and administrative impediments, saying we're just not going to transfer money to that. So the questions are, do you think you can have an approach to divestment that doesn't mention Israel that's going to work? Is this a betrayal? Is the Green councils that have done this? Is this a betrayal of the pledges they made when they got elected? And more broadly, I guess we're talking about this Zionism is racism resolution. People maybe join the Greens and have different ideas of the long-term view of it. Some people might want to cause a rupture, by pushing this forward. Some people might think you can actually turn the Green Party into an anti-Zionist, anti-imperialist party. I mean, is that possible given its sort of roots as a capitalist party? What can we help to achieve? What kind of impediments might you face? So that's about 5 questions, but
So do you want to deal with Satish's question first?
I'll deal with Satish first then. Everything's possible if we make it possible. Defeat will happen if we permit it and we sit back and we say, okay, this is ultimately the short of it, is why I got involved with the Green Party. At the moment, we didn't have any alternative, right? There was nowhere else to go. Many of us here probably as well were waiting for your party to become a party, and while everyone was, we could see the internal splits and the bickering and the rifts already, and we're like, okay, look, great, I hope they get off the ground, but if they don't, I'm not going to stick around waiting when there's work to be done. So this was why we got involved and thought, right, let's roll up our sleeves, muck in the Green Party. Now, there is no such thing as a perfect party, and any one of us here who've been involved in politics will know that. And the only way that we're going to change that is when we're in it, when we are the change. And that's exactly what we're doing in the Green Party. There are many things wrong that need changing, but the people that this has drawn, and the motion especially has drawn in, and the position on Palestine has drawn in more and more people who do realise that this change needs to occur and who are pushing for it. And you're very welcome, Satish, to come and join us and push further and be one of those councillors to go and give them merry hell in the councils. And yes, I don't believe that you can achieve it without calling it. You have to call a duck, right? And this is, we pulled out all through the archives, the anti-apartheid movement archives, and there were really strong, solid motions that condemned, that expressed their abhorrence against apartheid South Africa, that called for full, immediate, permanent divestment, the severance of all ties. I mean, this is what we need, and there should be nothing less than that defined. We define it as what it is. This is what you're funding. It's not acceptable that there's any investment in Israel. They are a racist pariah state, and they should be isolated. They do not have a right to exist, no legal, moral, or ethical right. And so us pushing that and reiterating and equipping them with the necessary arguments, so when they face their little Zionist Hasbro components in there, they can obliterate those arguments. Many of them are so afraid of being slapped with the anti-Semite stick and false allegations of that they'd rather back away than confront it, which is another reason I keep saying to people in these groups and campaign organisations, you have to also challenge the IHRA definition, because as long as people are afraid to speak, they'd rather sit back quietly and not take that stick. So we have to confront that with it. So, and strategy is important. So I've been advocating for those who now, where there are Green-led councils. Some have taken out Labour, which is great, and we hope they take out more of them. And in those positions, they can call for it. I mean, we've actually set this up in the Green Party already. There's policy passed in support of BDS. They're the first party that have acknowledged that Israel is an apartheid state committing genocide. They call for the government to issue apology for the Balfour Declaration, and they designated the IOF as a terrorist agency. There's a foundation. All of that is laying out the foundation. So what are you going to do next? Continue to endorse and fuel and justify a racist, apartheid, pariah, rogue, genocidal state? Or are you going to do something about it and sever the ties? So that is what we want. And it's about aligning ourselves with the positions and the policies that they've adopted, and encouraging the councillors to take this principled position and apply the policies that we've already put in place. And this is me also recruiting you, Satish, directly. You want that to change, you've got to be in it and change it. So we're on a recruitment drive. Any future councillors, MPs in the House? Yes, it's a really horrible, shitty arena, and I hate it myself. But here I am, because it's one of many, and I'm not limited to just that. We need grassroots action. We need action through the workers-led movement. That's really vital. Legal action. From every direction, we hit them, and it's like a pressure vacuum, and at some point it will implode. And this is the push that we're applying, the pressure, and those of us that get involved to shake it up and making it happen. So Satish, I've got some leaflets there, right? There's a recruitment thing. You just scan it and you're in. So welcome to Green Party, Satish. And I'm going to give you guys, there are some leaflets that look like this, floating around somewhere. I think one of my behind, it's on the table there somewhere. So do grab one of those, and there's the 3 QR codes on the back that you can scan to join both our group, join the party, join our Instagram, and join us in hopefully liberating Palestine and ourselves here too. Thank you.
Just on your what you said, of course, the anti-fascism needs to be anti-fascism everywhere. It needs to be internationalist if it's going to have any hope at all. And I think that applies in Palestine the way it applies anywhere else.
Thank you so much. All right, we're going to round this up quickly. One last round, and then there'll be 2 questions. So Agatha at the back, and if you don't have anyone else, that's fine. Agatha at the back. Oh, yes, Carlos as well. Agatha and Carlos. All right, thanks.
Hello, hi. Mine is just a practical question, like a how-to question. I've got to say that I can't vote to the general election in this country because of my passport, but I can vote the locals. I was wondering if I could still join the Green Party even if I cannot vote to the general election, just to help with the motion, to pass the motion.
Yes. We have already. Shall I go back? We have already established that the UN called the Zionist entity a racist endeavor. The ICJ has done similarly with calling it racism and apartheid. Behind every type of racism, there is obviously some kind of supremacy. Why didn't you call the motion Zionism is Jewish supremacy?
Right.
The very short answer, which we've established in the motion, is that not every Jew is a Zionist, and not every Zionist is Jewish. There is Christian Zionism as well. I mean, we can end up talking theology, semantics, until the cows come home. But the reality on the ground is that this is Zionism, and it's not limited to Jewish supremacy. It is a racist, supremacist, settler, colonialist ideology and its practice, and it covers pretty much all of those under Zionism, but without limiting it to those also who are fueling it, who are anti-Zionists. Who are anti-Jewish, sorry. So they themselves, many of them are against Judaism as well, and their colonialist or imperialist endeavors are very different to some of the Jewish supremacists. So it encapsulates all of them under one, which is why that was our decided main focus, because we know it's not limited to, and there certainly does exist also racial hierarchies in Judaism. So you could have a whole debate on that subject alone. But right now, that's not going to change things on the ground. So we've identified the reality of the problem as it is to us as Palestinians, that the differentiation between Zionism and Judaism, and that, as I've said, not every Jew is Zionist and not every Zionist is Jewish. I hope that answers it. I know briefly, but if you wanted to add more, you're very welcome. You'll get a much more elaborate approach.
Just a little addition, and it has not. I wasn't part of your discussion, so I don't know why you did what you did and what you didn't do. But I remember when we were talking in the early 2000s about pushing an analysis of Israel as an apartheid state. We've continued to get pushback even from Palestinians about, like, what about the occupation? No, it's also genocide. You know, these kinds of things. One is. These things aren't mutually exclusive, right? So to establish that one of these is the case is still important and worthwhile. But the other thing is that when you're a political party or dealing with the UN or with the state system, you unfortunately have to translate yourself into that language of the international state system and the language of law and international law. Supremacy is not a legal term. There is no ban on supremacy. You won't find an international convention against supremacy. What you will find is the CERT, the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. You will find a convention against apartheid. You will find the Rome Convention calling apartheid a crime against humanity, similar with genocide. So there is a sense in which when you want to kind of engage the state, and, you know, for someone like me, it's not really something I want to do, but for people who have the patience and grit for it, then you do have to sort of translate yourself into that language. And racial discrimination, institutionalized racism, systemic discrimination, these are categories that carry a legal definition, carry legal weight, and carry legal consequence. So if it is established that Israel is an apartheid state, is a state committing the crime of apartheid, then is a state committing a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute. And what that entails is that all states in the international system, states, individuals, companies, any kind of entity, has an obligation to do everything in its power to stop the commission of that crime. Right? So when you establish legally that it's committing genocide, committing apartheid, committing racial discrimination, that's supposed to trigger all kinds of consequences on a state level. And by the way, it's also one of the stronger arguments in terms of BDS, right? So, well, why would we do boycotts if the Palestinian Authority, which is just like a kind of quisling appendage of the Israeli occupation, but if the Palestinian Authority isn't boycotting, why would I boycott in Britain? If the British state isn't boycotting, how am I as an individual, or us as a campaign, or us as a city council, or a corporation, or a supermarket? How are we supposed to boycott? It's a very strong argument. You actually are internationally obligated to boycott and withdraw your sanctions, withdraw your investments, because it's committing a crime against humanity, right? And so if someone wants to come out, again, this is just legal speak. This isn't the language of the streets. This isn't actually the language of power. But again, we have to be able to operate in these different places. And when you're talking about the state and political parties, you do kind of have to translate yourself into that language, unless you find a more creative way to operate in some kind of other more organic language. But I think racism is also part of the language that we use in our day-to-day, right? It's understandable to people, and people immediately know what that is, I think, or hopefully.
Sorry, I just realised we're going to have a chat after.
All right, cool. So Agatha, yeah, Lubna's going to talk to you afterwards. That's your answer. Okay, guys, I think we are going to wrap it up right now. Thank you for Lubna and Hazem for coming down. It is getting really late, so thank you everyone else for coming. Just to let you know a few updates, we've got another event on this Thursday, same time, same place over here. Everyone, I'm pretty sure many people know about what happened at the Great Israel Real Estate event, the complete disaster of policing over there. So we've got an event called Policing the Great Israel Real Estate Event this Thursday at 7 o'clock, where we'll have representatives from Netpol come down. We'll be talking about their report on the policing of the event, and we'll also have an activist, a camp guardian, who was there as well, talking about what he's doing and what other movements are doing to make sure that the police are more accountable for their behavior in pro-Palestine demonstrations. So that will be happening this Thursday at 7 o'clock over here. So please come down. So just to round that up, I just want to quickly ask you guys, just your final thoughts on the subject quickly. You can say it quickly if you want, on Zionism is racism, like your final thoughts, and how can people get in touch with you guys? Yeah?
So, like I said, okay, the leaflets. You can sign up. We have the website set up, which is greensforpalestine.co.uk, and our group, our campaign, Grassroots. If you wanted to join us there too, it's Greenwich Palestine Alliance, and we work with various organisations and campaign groups, and many of which have endorsed this as well. So, like I've said, it's more than emotion. This is a movement, and please use it. Please take it. This is not plagiarism. I'm giving you consent. Use it in its entirety. Just don't dilute it. If you want to add to it, that's fine. You know, like repeal the Terrorism Act and the anti-trade union legislation. They're things that we did add to it in different motions in trade union branches. So please will feel welcome to do that and get in touch with us by email. Join our Instagram account so you can keep updated with what's happening on, and join us. Thank you.
Yeah, Zionism is racism, and we need to smash it. That's my final words. You shouldn't get in touch with me individually, but if you want to support a publishing house working on translating Palestinian writers, then you can find us on Instagram, Safarjal Press. I co-posted this event, so you can find me that way, I guess, on Instagram as well.
All right, guys, thank you so much, and I hope you guys have a good night. Thank you. Take care.